And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bashing us, him.
All right, attention to roll call.
That's right. Good morning, everybody. We're back. 8:05 live Eastern time, and of course 5:05 for me. It's dark outside still in the great state of California. First, before we go ahead, shout out to my man, my brother Sal Greco. Did an awesome job yesterday on the show. Sal, shout out to you, man. That was some good stuff. He did a great job on the show. So, John, I'm happy to be back in California. I was in D.C. It was a quick run. I was there 2 days, but I'm glad to be back. And I said to myself, it's been over 2 years since I've been north of the Mason-Dixon line. I said, man, had I lived out in the Northeast my entire life, because it was freezing, brother. I'm glad to be back.
That's how I felt when I was in New York, man. I'm like, listen, I love New York. I spent all my summers there. I love the fall. I always hated the winter, bro. I swear, whenever I was in New York in the middle of December, January, February, even into March, I'm like, why do I live here? This is miserable. It's gray. It's dark at 4 o'clock. I'm like, but I'll tell you right now, I feel like I live in New York right now. I'm in Northeast Florida right now. It's freezing cold. It snowed yesterday in Destin. New Orleans got covered in a foot of snow. So much for global warming. I mean, I guess our politicians have not figured out how to fix the climate yet, because I don't know. I guess it's global cooling now. What are we going to call it?
It's upside down. Even yesterday, I was in LA yesterday. So after I got off at LAX, I stopped at a toy store to buy my kids some toys. This when I come home and they're happy, not mad at me for leaving. So, but sure enough, in this particular toy store, the guy that owned it was actually from Jersey. And now in LA the weather's good, but it's not beach weather. He said, there was a time where you would be in shorts, and he goes, in the winter I would be at the beach in LA, and the weather has changed completely. So the weather has changed upside down in the whole world. It's nuts. I was in DC. I tell you right now, it was a shit show. The ball itself was great. It was awesome, but what a shit show. And I can tell you right now, shout out to NYPD and all city cops throughout this country, because I was not impressed with the uniformed Secret Service. They had no idea how to move crowds. They were so unprofessional. They were screaming at people at the top of their lungs. I mean, women are dressed beautiful in gowns, and all the men are dressed in beautiful tuxes, and a lot of guys wore their uniforms, and the lines were just crazy getting through TSA, because that's where they checked you to get to the ball. And they were so unprofessional. I said, wow, I'm the most complained cop. If these guys worked at the CCRB, they would make my record look stupid. I mean, they were so out of control, screaming at people at the top of their lungs over nothing. John, it was insane.
No, yeah, I always say that, but again, it's the amount of exposure we get to people and incidents is just, it's not, you can't compare it to anywhere in the world. Maybe LA, maybe Chicago, but even that, I don't know if it's as frequent as what you're dealing with as a New York City cop in any borough, honestly, because you're going to go into Manhattan a lot to do New Year's, to do Thanksgiving. You're going to deal with millions of people and having to move millions of people. Those are like invaluable experiences to policing, to learn how to deal in large crowds versus how to deal with somebody as an individual. I'm telling you, I often think about it, because, when I see cops around the country and I talk to them, I'm like, a cop in New York City probably in a day trumps what this guy deals with in a quarter, of the year, probably one day. So then when you just multiply that, it's so much more. It's like when you look at the kids that play baseball growing up in Florida, they have an unfair advantage of the kids growing up playing baseball in the Northeast, because they just play baseball all year round, 365 days a year, as opposed to in the Northeast, you're playing for a few months out of the year. You're trying to simulate playing indoors and stuff like that, going to these trainings, but you can't replace that in-game experience. And that's kind of what New York is. Like, New York policing is that same model. It's your 365 days a year. You're dealing with a lot of crazy stuff. And the level of exposure is there. It matures you quicker. You learn quicker, and you actually learn how to be a much better cop. I gotta say, I don't think I was a great cop early on, my first year or two. I became a really good cop though, but between 3, 4, 5 years on, I was a really good community policing pro, going after criminals. I learned how to be a really good cop, how to see things, but I matured a lot in that time period. And I think it's the same thing like that. It's the reverse of Florida baseball kids.
I'm laughing at these comments. They're flying in. Good morning, guys. Hassan says level 1 has been terminated for Captain EDM. Thank you, brother. I'm back here in action. And no hat. Eric, it looks better. Trying to change it up. I saw you guys put the picture of me up in the tux, and my hair was fresh. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going another day without a hat. Popeye, damn it. What's up, brother? Great friend to the podcast. What does Popeye, damn it, say here? He goes, well, we need to find Eric a cap. Good morning. Sleepy Joe, shout out to you, brother. $2.99. Here we go. Coffee and donuts. Sal Greco says espresso. Of course. Sal's bougie. I was afraid yesterday, too. I figured, here we go. I said, Sal's going to show up in a full suit. I said, don't expect me to start wearing suits every day. Eric, your tux is much better than Kaz's. You know it, brother. So, and of course, miraculously, we're all back from D.C. Who's on here also? Juju, good morning to you.
Well, he was in the airport with you yesterday. You guys were just in different terminals.
Yeah.
He was in the Delta Lounge, bro. You were scrounging. You were just with general population. He was in the Delta Lounge with all high society.
I can tell you seriously. Shout out to City Cop. It's so true. I am biased towards the NYPD when it comes to moving crowds, and I saw it for myself. I mean, we're talking about. We had to go. The actual ball was at the Westin Hotel downtown. Beautiful hotel, but it was so cold outside. So what they did was they funneled people from the Marriott. It was about a block and a half before. There's a connector there. And it was just, listen, it was packed. It was packed. There's 3 huge balls going on at one time. You had the American Legion Veterans Ball, Commander-in-Chief Ball, and then there's one ball called the Liberty Ball. And you had one line, it was a VIP line, and then one that was straight into TSA outside. When they're outside, first of all, they probably had no toes left. They probably had frostbite. They're all in their heels, freezing. But they were a mess. Uniformed Secret Service came, and they were just screaming at people at the top of their lungs. Had no idea how to control a crowd. But I was kind of suspicious also. I said to my wife, I don't know, something looks like it's going on because the crowd, nothing changed with the crowd. All some uniformed Secret Service started saying, there's a fire hazard. We got to start getting people out of here. So I said, I don't know. Something's up. It didn't look right. So my wife said, what are you talking about? Everything was told bliss to her, right? It's funny. I went on a binge, John, and I've been watching Third Watch. I love Third Watch, old show, but I went on a binge, watched it again. And not to get totally off topic, but there was a part in the show. I'm like, you know what? This is what John and I talk about all the time. This is our lives. So, John, I don't know if you watch the show, but in the show, Faith Yokas is her name. It's played by Molly Price. She's a female cop in the show. And she goes out with her husband to a shopping center. And I was like, oh, my God, this is our life. John and I talk about this all the time. And she says, she's talking to her husband after they went out to the shopping center. She goes, let me tell you my life. She goes, you said, it was a beautiful shopping center. What a nice day. She goes, you know what I saw? And, now it's older. It shows 2003. She's like, I saw a guy go to a payphone, never put a quarter in, looking around. I knew he was working. That guy was in plain clothes. I knew he was working. He was on the job. Then I saw a Coke deal go down. And she goes, then I saw a lady in her midsection was like real fat. And I knew she just shoplifted. She goes, I want to see a nice shopping center. I said, oh my God, that's our lives.
Sad, bro. That's why we live in this negativity, bro. This is like, people are like, you should just stop. I'm like, what do you want me to do? What could I do? I mean, this just is what it is. I turn on. I don't watch I watch the greatest show on earth. I watch the greatest character that's ever held the title of New York City Mayor, Eric Adams. I mean, it's the greatest show on earth. New York City currently, the NYPD, is currently a comedy show that you couldn't even script. If you scripted a show like this, people wouldn't even believe it. It's almost hard to believe. It's like when Hogan went Hollywood Hogan. It's like wait, what? Hogan's a bad guy? It's crazy to watch, dude. So yeah, we got Whitney Tilson coming on, a Democratic candidate for mayor. We're gonna keep it same style platform that Jim Walden We're going to have a few other mayoral candidates come on already and talk to a lot of the PR teams. Same format. We're not giving anybody the questions. You want to come on, we're going to go through crime. We're going to go through, how you feel about mental health, the border crisis, what's your position on the mandate, on rehiring workers, and just go through and let them speak. And that's it. We're not going to corner nobody. We're going to let them tell us their positions, what their plans are, and we're going to have them on, and we're going to go the same way. So I think someone was asking 8:05 or 8:30. 8:30, we'll have the candidates come on. 8:05, myself and Eric will open up. They'll stay with us for about an hour or so. And then, we'll end it off with the day. And I think it's a good format. I think you're not going to see mayoral candidates get a long form podcast anywhere where they're actually sitting down with blue collar people. I mean, because that's what this audience is. This isn't, people call, we looked up all the cop podcasts, and I'm like, this isn't a cop podcast. It's a blue collar podcast. Like, it just happens to be co-hosted by two retired NYPD lieutenants. But when you look at the audience, it's cops, it's firefighters, teachers, nurses, doctors. It's a wide variety of people. I'm like, so it's this, I'm like, yeah. Well, you get to the people in the NYPD who listen to this podcast. Yeah, they do. But it's blue collar. You're speaking to the blue collar worker. Also, we'll bring up retiree healthcare. That's another thing. Like, what's their stances on that? And whatever their stances are, We're not looking to change it. And so we're excited to meet with all of them. Honestly, I whether I agree with their platforms or I don't.
John, you're spot on. John, I gotta tell you, I agree. That's why on this podcast, the long form podcast, I don't see a point of getting argumentative with someone that we interview. Let them say their piece, and then you make a determination. Well, you know what? I like what they said, or I totally don't agree. And if it comes out, it sounds contradictory of their own plan, or it just doesn't even make sense, or something that's not good for New York City, let it play out. And that's the beauty about the podcast. It's almost like it's evidence based. So now, when these candidates go forward, as they're challenging each other and they're competing for mayoral candidate of New York City, this is evidence right here, and we could actually challenge them to say, hey, and hold them accountable and say, hey, 9 months ago, whatever time elapses, hey, 9 months ago, this is what you said on the podcast. This was what you stance, and you totally shifted. And if they want to say, no, I didn't say that, well, here you go. We have the podcast to show you. So the evidence is there. I think these interviews are great. I think long-form podcast really shows someone's character. There's only so much you can hide. It's not much of a soundbite, right? You just hear exactly what someone's about. The character comes true. You can't really fake it too much. Mikey G, Metal Detective Long Island, shout out to you, brother. He says to some guy from Connecticut, he used to be a hedge fund manager. Try saying that 3 times. Yeah, absolutely. He was a hedge fund manager, so if you obviously looked up some bio. But I think what's interesting was the common theme. De Blasio, we had Jim Walden here, and now Whitney. There's no one's from New York City anymore. And that part, listen, I do believe that they have a race in this mayoral candidacy here. But it's a shame nobody's actually from New York anymore. That part, honestly, it's sad.
Well, listen, but New York has always been that way. It's a transient city. People move into New York. It's honestly the capital of America. Like it's amazing that we have this idiot Eric Adams running it, but it's the capital of America. It really is. Like, it's not Washington, D.C. It's New York City. So, people grow up and they dream of coming to New York City, and then they come here and they, and they create their lives, and then they're like, you know what, I want to manage this city. So, although I was born there, I just happened to be lucky enough to be born there. So have you, I don't knock anyone for like deciding to move there. I knock people that move there later in life in their 30s and their 40s, and then they tell us how to live and they tell us what's great for New York. That's when I'm like, wait, slow down. You didn't live here in the 80s and the 90s. You don't remember what the city was like. Don't start with the nonsense, and we're seeing all of those patterns emerge now. But when you look at New York as a whole, it's a very transient place. It's a very transient city. And it is the most diverse city in the entire world. You are going to experience every culture, and it's the same thing. That's why I honestly think that's why we do handle crowds a lot better, and that's why we do handle these millions of situations a lot better too, is because of the exposure we have to nearly every culture. Where I live in Florida now is very nice. There's a million things. There's a million restaurants. It is diverse. There's a lot of different ethnicities and all of that, but it's not like that true, authentic, like right off the boat from all of those different countries like it is in New York. And so when the biggest knock I have whenever I travel anywhere else in the world is you can't get ethnic cuisine anywhere like you can in New York. You can't go get like, I want to go to a Turkish spot and go get legitimate, like you're in Turkey, sit down and eat that food. And like, that's the thing I think about New York. It's like, that's what's special about it is everybody goes there, wherever it's from, wherever America or any part of the world. So I get it. I get why everybody wants to go there.
It's funny you say that, right? That's one thing, I haven't been north of the Mason-Dixon line in over 2 years. I've been traveling through Brazil and Thailand, Malaysia, Bali, all over the country. It's been my thing traveling. But one thing I missed, I don't want to live in New York again, but one thing I missed about New York and D.C. and the East Coast is the character, the personalities. That's one thing I miss big time. You know what? Shout out to California, the West Coast. It's beautiful, the weather, nice people. But there is something special about growing up in New York and the Northeast Coast. And it's people, the way that they talk to you. They joke around, they break your chops, but they mean well. It's like I remember, we were bar hopping before we went to the ball. Everybody was bar hopping. It was just too busy at the viewing and the inauguration. So everybody started going to bars and we're watching on big screens, which is great. But we had this waitress. She was super cool. And she was a gymnast, so she was totally jacked up, but super cool. And she was, busting our chops and making fun of us. And I was like, this is what but she meant well, in a cool way. I was like, this is what I missed about the Northeast, this part, because people in LA are cool, but they don't really get that, that joking around, we really call someone a derogatory name, but you really, you mean something like a term of endearment. That personality that we get from growing up in New York and Philadelphia and DC, stuff like that I missed. It was super cool. I'm like, this is a breath of fresh air. Like, she's being cool, but making fun of us. I'm like, this I miss.
Yeah. No, it's New York's a wild place, man. And I think that's another thing where, we do very well with the details too, is I think people are shocked about cops having a sense of humor and joking, moving large crowds. I like to get everybody's attention if it's getting crazy. I would never curse and yell. I would just grab like a bullhorn and be like, all right, everybody, New Year's Eve is canceled. Please exit the other way. And then everyone stops. They're like, what? I'm like, no, just do us a favor. Keep it orderly and go that way. And, and like, that's something you don't get in other places. Like, you won't get that in other places, So.
I got to laugh. Juju made the stupidest comment. Don't want to live in New York, but love receiving the benefits provided by New York. LOL. This is the stupidest comment. So, John, we worked 20 years in a police department, but we should forfeit our pensions because we don't live in New York anymore. If it was up to Juju, you would have to, you leave New York and you leave your pension. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Come on, Juju, come up with a better one.
Don't even, just ignore him. He's a loser.
I know. That's hilarious. Vincent Scotto, some of the most funniest people you would meet used to be New York City cops. Absolutely. That one thing I would say, when we talk about if you ever missed a job, I don't miss the job, but if we ever talk about it's the people, right? The cops, the humor, breaking each other's chops. That part I do miss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I miss the job. I do. I miss some of the nonsense. I'm not gonna lie. I miss it. It was fun. It was fun. I had a great time. Did you see? We're not gonna get into it deep because obviously this guy's coming on soon. But Kaz Daughtry made overtime in 2024, a significant amount, 6 figures in overtime. Sam Antar had put it out on his X, and I'm like, what do you think about now we have one deputy commissioner? It's never happened before. We have a deputy commissioner putting in for overtime amidst an overtime scandal and making over $100,000 in overtime.
Well, it's another egregious form of nepotism in this administration. To go alongside, think about how much money the taxpayers are paying right now and how much it actually is bleeding the city from the NYPD alone. I've been looking at New York City open data, and you actually, shout out to Popeye Dam. It helped me get a lot of information. Thank you, brother, with some of these charts. But you look up and you see some of these chiefs that are riding out their vacation time. we're talking about sometimes they're on the payroll for 3 years. Think about that. For 3 years, and they're making over $200,000 a year. So think about it. It's almost $1 million that they're not even at work and not even being paid part of their pension system. They're still being paid from New York City police payroll. And so it's insane. And there's so many chiefs that are still riding their time out. And then we see these commissioners now that are promoted by rocket fuel getting all this overtime. It's insane. So that's why I agree. Shout out to Sal Greco when he says that Epps is the hero in this. And I think a lot of people get the wrong idea when we say that. We're not saying that she's not complicit, that she didn't get the benefits of this overtime, but she is the hero in this, and she stepped up. Because if it wasn't for her stepping up in the manner that she did fighting back, because she had the heavier hand and she had the hand of leverage, well, this whole thing would have been blamed on her. Everybody would have washed their hands, and all the stuff would have been swept under the rug. They tried to bait it. John, I heard you say it. Yes, I was watching the show myself on the way to the airport, and John said she's actually the fall girl. And you're right, John. She turned out to be, they tried to put all the blame on her. You know what? Madry wiped his hands. He probably figured, I'll get myself another girl, right? And he wiped his hands, and she was going to take the whole blame for all this overtime in the department. So shout out to her. She spinned the tail right on them.
Well, I mean, and you look at this, and now you have a deputy commissioner in the NYPD, and they do not make money. It's a salaried position. It's a completely salaried position, and all of a sudden now we have people making overtime amidst this overtime scandal. And you're like, where is the accountability from New York City mayor? This got called out last year when he was an assistant commissioner, Kaz Daughtry, and he was making overtime. And now all of a sudden, he could put in for overtime. But listen, we'll get on this topic. We're going to explore this topic more likely tomorrow. We have Whitney Tilson here. We're excited to have him on. So we're gonna bring him up to the stage, get to know him, run through his platform. And we're definitely going to get into how a deputy commissioner in the NYPD is running overtime tomorrow, or maybe even a little later after Whitney leaves. But, without further ado, I'd like to bring to the stage Whitney Tilson, candidate for New York City mayor. Whitney, thank you for joining us this morning, my friend.
My pleasure. I learned about your podcast a couple of weeks ago from a police officer after my bike got stolen. And I listened to it, and I was like, hey, I got to be on that.
Were you hoping we'd find the bike?
Yeah, they said it's not likely. It was sort of ironic. I was inside a building giving a talk about my mayoral campaign. Lots of questions were about crime. And at the very moment, I was the victim of larceny.
Well,
how was the reporting process for you?
Well, it was interesting. It happened at 55th and 11th, and it was at 10:30 at night. So I went to the local precinct, the 18th precinct, Midtown North, and the officers there said you have to go back to the scene of the crime and call 911. So, which was the right answer. They were very helpful. Had a good conversation with one of the officers, and he's the one who showed me your podcast, which he was a big fan of. He said, if you want to understand NYPD, go to this podcast. Everybody listens to it, and so. Then I sat there listening to your interview with Jim Walden after I called 911, waiting for the police officer, the police car to show up and take my report. And they were busy that night. There'd been a robbery in the area, so nobody came. And I was sitting there freezing. It was a cold night. And now it's like almost midnight. And so I called 911, and then I said, we can't tell you when the car is coming. So finally I flagged down a police car that had stopped another car. And I went up to the officers and said, hey, can you help me out? I'm freezing here. They came over, very helpful, but they basically said, forensics going to have to come. Nobody's working the midnight shift, so you're going to have to come back the next day. So it turned into a whole process. But all the officers, half dozen officers I dealt with, couldn't have been nicer, very professional. There's a process. And I even got a call from a detective the next day who's investigating it. But he said, the bike's probably long gone. By now, it was all captured on video surveillance. So I saw the guys coming up, cutting my kryptonite lock, heading off my bike, but it was too grainy to be able to identify them.
Yeah, I see that a lot. When I used to work, I see in the Bronx too, but when I used to work on the Lower East Side, I used to see that all the time, where they would cut right through these locks. These locks are just an obstacle to buy you time, but they get right through it. I'm sorry that happened to you. Unfortunately, it's a common theme, but as I appreciate it, that the cops referred you to the podcast, and I do. I appreciate it. But there's a lot of stuff here that could have been done differently. I'm glad that they were professional and helped you out, but really they shouldn't refer you to the scene. they should just take you to the scene. Like, listen, okay, we'll take you to the scene. Let's do a canvas. Let's see if there's a video. In the meantime, that's when they start to build a rapport with you. You get in the police car and talk to the cops and find out what happened. You had it on the lock. Where did you park it? And start to get information from you. But listen, I do appreciate that they refer you to the podcast. It's probably pretty tough to find your actual bike. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. These things happen in New York City quite too often.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly reflects, one of the things I've been talking about is, Mayor Adams is out there saying, oh, it's all in your imagination. Crime is down. And I've went and pulled the data, and he's correct. Murders are down 20 odd percent in the 3 years that he's been mayor. But every other type of crime, including grand larceny, which was what happened to me, is up double digits, in some cases 30% or more. And so New Yorkers aren't crazy. They're not imagining things. Serious, the 7 major felonies in the last 5 years are up 52% on average. And, the NYPD, every officer I've talked to basically says that, for 25 years, crime went down, down, down. And we felt like heroes. We were doing our job and protecting the New York public. And New York became one of the safest large cities in America as recently as 5 years ago. But we've gone very sharply in the wrong direction since then. And officers feel like the last 5 years, it's been emotionally, frustrating for them. They feel like there's a revolving door, and New Yorkers don't feel safe. They're leaving the city in large numbers, and I'm determined to reverse that as mayor.
Oh, Whitney, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you here. By the way, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm sure you said you saw the podcast of how we interview people. So why don't you just tell us about yourself? I know you're from Connecticut. You ran a hedge fund, but how you got involved in this race, and if you can tell us also how your experience transitions to public service, and if you can tell us about your experience in New York City.
Sure. Well, I'm the child of Peace Corps parents, so I come from a pretty lefty background, I guess. Grew up in Tanzania and Nicaragua, but I'm a business person by background. Graduated from business school 30 years ago. Wasn't lucky enough to be born in New York, so I did the next best thing and married one. Came down here 30 plus years ago in the early 90s during a pretty tough time. And frankly, we probably weren't planning to raise our kids in the city. We had 3 daughters in the 90s, all in their 20s now. And the city got safer. I grew to love the city, and we raised our family here. And then my daughters all went away to college, or are all back now, starting their careers here. So my family's story is a happy one, and New York's been great to us. But I've been super politically active over 20 plus years in the Democratic Party. I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I've become increasingly fed up with my own party and how we have one party rule here in this city, and we're screwing it up. And so after the election, November 5th, which I think Trump, 90% of the U.S. counties shifted toward Trump relative to the previous election. And we sure saw that happen here in New York. And voters across the board, working class folks, traditional Democratic voters, have turned away from the party because they're feeling the mismanagement by my own party. And so I decided to switch sides. I'd always sort of been a fundraiser and supporting politicians. I decided to get on the other side and actually throw my hat in, try and become one, because I didn't see anybody in the race. I just saw a bunch of career politicians who they're the ones that are screwing up this city, and we need change. And I'm the only change candidate in the race.
So Whitney, you spoke on crime, and I know we agree with you. Like, violent crime's up nearly over 20% since Eric Adams stepped in, and it's a complete denial. To us, we say he's running a perception management campaign, and literally slapping the face of New Yorkers, telling them, no, crime's not up. Don't believe the cops, what they're telling you on the street. Don't believe what you're reading in the papers. What other issues do you see? You saw New York City transition, right? You saw it go from a city of crime to the safest big city in the world. What else? What other type of mismanagement are you seeing in New York City that you feel that you can make an impact on?
Yeah, well, big picture, we are sort of become a business unfriendly city, as my party's sort of been hijacked from the left and views wealth and businesses as a negative thing. I'm a pro-business centrist Democrat, and I think for this city to grow and be prosperous, I want to create, it's an embarrassment that CNBC ranked all 50 states on business friendliness, and New York State came in dead last. I want to be a super pro-business mayor, and ranging from big corporations, Amazon, the next Amazon wants to come invest tens of billions of dollars here and create tens of thousands of jobs. I'll drive out to Teterboro and pick up the CEO, right? All the way down to small businesses. So it's about wealth, prosperity, job creation, and that creates rising wages, which helps address the second big thing, which is just affordability. People are leaving the city. We've lost over 700,000 people just in the last 4.5 years, 8% of our population. That's the second highest population loss of the 70 largest cities in the United States. Only San Francisco is worse. And it's because people, number one, can't pay their rent. Number two, don't feel safe. And number three, aren't happy with a public school system in which we're spending $43,000 a kid, and half the kids aren't even basic level readers. So across the board, the city government is just doing a lousy job. And I'm a business person. I know bad management when I see it, and that's what we got.
I read some of your bio, and I was quite impressed. And while I see, before we even have this conversation, I see ourselves actually having different political spectrums, but your bio speaks for itself, and it is impressive. So, but you did mention in your bio, I saw that you said that under your plan that there would be a reduction in crime. So since we're already talking about crime, what would be your plan for the NYPD, and what plans do you have in place to have a reduction in crime?
Yeah, I guess I would address that in two big ways. One is crime, as but the general public doesn't particularly understand that crime is super localized. If you just read the headlines, you would think crime is random, happens everywhere. In fact, more than half the crime occurs in 3% of the city blocks, right? Those tend to be the areas where the city government's failing across the board. The schools are the worst. There are no after-school programs. The streetlights are broken. The parks are a mess. The housing projects aren't being managed properly. There are no mental health services for the people who need it, right? So there's got to be sort of a long-term investment. We can't expect cops to be social workers. The city government has a lot of agencies, and we spend ungodly amounts of money. We're the richest city in the world with the highest tax rates. So our city budget is double that of any other city on earth. We're just not spending that money well. So that's got to be the first part. The second part is a law enforcement part. And I think the fact that we're at a 35-year low today in terms of simply the number of police officers, understaffing is certainly an issue. And but then the cops need the support of the criminal justice system, which has created a revolving door. Basically all low-level crimes were decriminalized due to a series of pieces of legislation, mostly at the state level, that went too far. I don't think that somebody who steals a bottle of shampoo should, on the first offense, go to Rikers. On the other hand, when there's an organized criminal gang doing it, or it's the 20th time somebody's been arrested, it can't just be a revolving door, because it leads to, if not outright danger, certainly big quality of life issues for all of us.
Yeah. So we've been talking about the Adams administration for about 2 years now, and we've been saying that we have not seen the amount of cops retire early, or even resign and go to other states than we have at this point. This is the most amount of cops than at any other point in history that have left. So morale's really low, and we attribute that to the mismanagement of the New York City Police Department, particularly the people that Eric Adams has put in charge to run the New York City Police Department. And we're seeing numerous corruption scandals break out from the NYPD. And, so while we're not asking you who would be your police commissioner, we're asking you what you would look for in a police commissioner and how you would expect the NYPD to operate as an organization, both with integrity and providing public safety. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you one thing: there won't be 4 police commissioners in my first 3 years. That's not normal. It's certainly indicative of terrible management. I guess the good news is finally, under duress, I've heard the threat from Hochul. I'm going to literally remove you from office if you don't start to clean things up. And I've heard good things about Jessica Tisch. I'd be curious to hear your perspective. Obviously the biggest downside is she's sort of a managerial type, but hasn't been a cop, hasn't walked the beat or whatever. but someone who would both be have very strong management skills, because it's just a huge management challenge. The whole city is, but the NYPD certainly is. But ideally have somebody who's got sort of street cred with the rank and file as well. So those would be sort of the basic criteria. And that's sort of what I'm looking for across the city government. And we have a strong mayoral system. The mayor appoints the top 155 people in the city government. And the head of the NYPD and the head of the Department of Education would be probably the two most important hires. But across the board, as mayor, I approach this with humility. I set sort of the big agenda, but then I want to hire 155 people who are all smarter than I am in their areas of expertise, and then let them, I have two messages for them. One, run your department better, serve the people of New York better. And then two, find me the fact. Find me, I know every area. I can do a top level and top down analysis or a bottoms up. There's so much money, but it is not translating into good services for New Yorkers. So it's either corruption, it's some combination of corruption, which is deep under Mayor Adams. It's not just him, it's 26 of his top people are under investigation, have been indicted or resigned in disgrace. 26. It's the rot is deep here. So it's corruption, but also just inept management. Even when I agree with him on a policy basis, there's no follow through. Nothing ever gets done. He has a good speechwriter.
Well, clearly, like I said, your bio was impressive. You managed a hedge fund for 18 years, which is a long time, almost 20 years just as a cop service in their entire career. So you understand leadership, right? And what do people need in organizations? They need protections and support. So that's why I ask you, I'm a firm believer that intrusive police work is the foundation to safety when it comes to police work, especially for public safety for New York City. What is your stance on qualified immunity in regards to that?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I think police officers have an extremely difficult job where you have to make almost sometimes life or death decisions, their own life. And I've actually done some training with Navy SEALs and other people where I've gone, where I've had a fake gun, but gone into rooms where they've got actors playing bad guys and all, and you have to decide whether to shoot or not, right? And that when your adrenaline's pumping, it's snap decision, and so I can appreciate how sometimes you can make the wrong decision, be well-intentioned, right? So there's obviously a line, whereas there are always some bad apples in any large workforce, over 33,500 people right now, right? So there's got to be accountability there. I know you agree with that. And often they're tricky judgment calls, right? But generally speaking, I'm going to give cops a lot of leeway when doing their jobs, unless there's evidence that, they're abusing. I mean, the cops are given incredible power, the power to kill if necessary. And there are always going to be some people who abuse that, and that needs to be dealt with. But generally speaking, I'd give them pretty broad leeway.
Yeah. Qualified immunity became like a dirty word. And, I think the public and a lot of politicians we saw like really muddy the waters. And we're not saying somebody that broke the law or went outside of their training. Well, obviously, why should taxpayers foot the bill to support a corrupt person or someone? But right. When someone's acting within their training on behalf of the citizens of New York, so we appreciate you taking that stance and supporting qualified immunity. A couple of issues that we've been advocating for here. One, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has been in direct conflict with New York City retiree health care. That's across the board, something that's been written into law, into our contract, as well as during the COVID mandates. There were numerous members of the city workers who were terminated as a result. They had never received due process, and they were given an opportunity to reapply, no reinstatement, no anything like that. Jim Walden was on here. He actually said that he would reinstate terminated workers who were terminated over New York City's COVID mandate with back pay and an apology. What would your take be on that?
Yeah. If I recall what Jim said is he said he would set up a commissioner, I don't know if it's commission is the right word, but to evaluate it on a case by case basis. In some cases where fraud might have occurred or whatever, maybe there wouldn't be reinstatement, but that generally speaking, he would be in favor of bringing people back. And I was sort of nodding my head as I listened to it. I was impressed with Jim, frankly. I'm a little puzzled why he's running as an independent. I don't think there's any lane there. You got to pick a side. It's that's just the way our system works, right? So I'm running as a Democrat, as a lifelong Democrat, but basically against my own party, against the political machine and the political bosses who've hijacked it. That's a tricky lane. I could see him running as a Republican, and generally speaking, I wish the Republican Party would be more sensible and centrist, just like my own party. So you asked there were two questions about retiree healthcare and sort of COVID mandates and reinstating folks.
Yes.
My understanding is regarding the healthcare for retirees is that it's not a question of like cutting off the healthcare benefits that were promised, but basically the government is trying to rein in the cost by restricting it in some ways and reduce the cost. And that's certainly causing some blowback from the retirees. Is that a fair assessment?
So I could put you in touch if you're not too familiar with it. I could put you in touch with Marian Pizzatola, the New York City Retirees Union, and basically what's happening is Medicare eligible retirees, so people that are over 65 or that are disabled, they're being put into a different type of plan, which their premiums as well as their copays there's no cap on it. It could skyrocket. And, those are their most vulnerable years, New York City retirees, and they were promised something. So we have people 80, 90 years old that have pensions of $3,000 or $4,000, and now they have medicine that's, let's say, $10,000 a month, and they're literally going broke. You know what I mean? And they don't have the health care to protect them. The health care that's in place, although it could be improved, it's sufficient enough, but moving them into this different type of Medicaid type. Yeah. So, there's an issue with the healthcare, probably a management issue. It's not to say that it can't be improved, but they're actually getting less of a product. And I could put you in touch with it. But basically, it's been written into law that they would keep the same healthcare that active city employees have. And now they're trying to change that. Yeah.
I think New York should keep the promises that it made to the people who work for the city very clearly. I do appreciate as a business person, the underlying problem here is that politicians in the pockets of special interest groups or unions or whatever have created hidden liabilities that don't appear today, but very long tail, healthcare, pension, et cetera, liabilities that are just passed on to the next generation and all that could bankrupt us someday. So that's, as a business person and understanding finances, understanding how you can hide costs, that are going to come bite you in the rear, down the road is something that really needs to be addressed. And, when you're having a negotiation with any union, it's not just the pay increase this year, but what kind of promises are you making that could be much, much bigger, that 10, 20, 30 years down the road. So I do understand what the city is trying to do is not try and, cut off benefits, but sort of bend the shape of that cost curve. So the devil's in the details, I guess, is what I would say. But I understand, my predecessors who have signed, these deals, they are legally binding, and of course we'll honor them. So you asked about COVID and reinstating folks. Look, I think back in the day we were operating with sort of poor information. So the people who were doing this were trying to balance public safety with individual rights, and I think they went too far. And firing a lot of city employees with a lot of experience, particularly cops, went too far. I would love, given we are short at least 3,000 cops in the city, to the extent we can find people with veteran experience and bring them back and sort of say sorry for our screw up a few years ago. That makes sense to me. So that's I'm very open to that, and I think the idea of have to be evaluated on an individual basis probably makes sense. But I understand both of you were affected by this as well, and it led to your retirements.
Eric retired. It was a different issue.
Much different.
Eric was working in the South Bronx, and really, post George Floyd, and the CCRB had went after like numerous complaints and had amassed all these charges and just basically peppered up his record with these frivolous investigations. And every situation that Eric received a substantiated civilian complaint for, he was rewarded by the NYPD for, never received discipline from the NYPD, and basically held up his promotion to captain, and they wanted to take him off the street for absolutely no reason. And if we could show you the complaints, and we could show you what happened during the investigations and the investigations that were had. And both of us are not against the CCRB. We believe in oversight, but we feel there's high mismanagement there, and there's definitely a political weaponization there, or to basically paint some officers, especially Eric Dim, as somebody that they're really not, and basically took these investigations out. So Eric was labeled the most complained cop in the NYPD, based upon this 8 set of charges that were amassed over a 5-year period. That really, when you look at the cases, and I was the liaison for the NYPD and CCRB, and I saw basically how that agency evolved and try to improve its standing in the city, as well as get a higher budget and more employees. And I'm very familiar with how investigations need to be done. I also worked in the Internal Affairs Bureau in the NYPD. And when I read through Eric's cases, there was literally nothing there that I'm like, wow, I can't believe they substantiated this. And there's numerous things on Eric's record today. Part of the 50A, that was at a state level. That was legislated. So the public has access to Eric's record, and there's things that are on Eric's record currently that have him as a substantiated complaint that actually are not substantiated. So his public record actually is not a reflection of his actual record. So there's a lot of issues there, and they're deep rooted, and I it would take a lot of time. So I don't think we need to get into it, but I retired early. My religious exemption was denied. New York City wouldn't recognize natural immunity, and there was really no due process put in place. Another friend of mine, Marlon Bethel, 16-year intelligence detective, black man, first generation immigrant, came to this country, immigrated through the process, worked very hard. He was terminated. I retired. He wouldn't leave. He didn't, and he was terminated, and basically there was no path for him to come back to work without signing away all his rights. And so it's a lot of those things that caused us to leave. And that's why we've been advocating to let everyone know what's going on, not just the politicians, the media, like what are the internals? Why are cops leaving? What are the pressures that they're facing? And basically, this podcast has been labeled as the voice of the voiceless. Because when you're in the system, you really can't speak out against the system.
Whitney, I just want to say it's actually a breath of fresh air. It's a pleasure that you came on this podcast, not knowing I was coined as the most complained cop, because I feel like there's an opportunity where I could be reverse judge, where you can make your own assessment. Because unfortunately, being coined as the most complained cop, there's an assessment made about who I am, my character, until people actually get an opportunity to know me. And that's one of my crusades I've been on, to be the catalyst for change for the Civilian Complaint Review Board and also the 50A, because the public record gives an assessment about this cop without any context. Because if you actually look into my career, you can see up to 2018, I was doing intrusive police work my whole career, anti-crime sergeant, special operations lieutenant, working in plain clothes. And you can see up to 2018, I had some complaints. It was kind of sporadic. It was a byproduct doing intrusive police work. But from 2018 to 2020, when legislation really we started to change, you could see the climatic change in my career. And 80% of my complaints are there, and they're from all the most violent perpetrators of the South Bronx. And these complaints actually derive from violent perpetrators. They're all arrests, and I was able to coincide and correlate. Here's my complaint from CCRB, and here's my award, Lieutenant of the Year. Here's another complaint, CCRB, Leader of the Finest. And so I coined and I own most complaint cop for that reason, because I've been misjudged with that 58. And there's other cops as well who will surpass me as the most complaint cop. And it's unfortunate with the 58, that's going to be the reflection. And it doesn't just affect you in your career, it affects you in your life. So that's why I asked about intrusive police work, qualified immunity, and hopefully we can make those changes. But I could say this. About a year prior to the mandate, I actually took the COVID vaccine myself. I was a Marine for 6 years. I figured I took so many shots, what's one more? So I didn't have a position at the time. But I do agree that all our police officers and all our civil service workers, they should all be brought back and not on an individual basis, because I think that it was ridiculous that they had 7 days to make a decision. And that's why I stand with John with this, because I believe that you should not have to take this shot if you didn't want to, especially when you're already employed. To come on the job is something different. But when you're already on the job, I think it was completely like I said, violate the law. So I hope you would be open to more discussions of possibly bringing everyone back. But with that being said, let's have a little fun. I just want to ask you right now. So sure enough, Adams doesn't look like he wants to drop out. And you talked about one party rule. Right now, we can't tell. The lines are being blurred. It almost is like Adams is in political purgatory. He's starting to lean more towards Republicans. It is every indication that he's either going to get possibly a pardon or a preemptive pardon. How do you feel about Eric Adams if he does get a preemptive pardon, and knowing at this point that potential superseding indictments have not even come out in this race? So how do you feel about Adams being a challenger in this, and at this point potentially getting a pardon?
It would not surprise me. He's obviously running down to Mar-a-Lago and down to the inauguration to pander to Trump. He obviously knows that the 5 indictments are just the tip of the iceberg. His corruption almost certainly runs much deeper, and the prosecutors have indicated a lot more indictments are coming. He also can look at the polls. He has the lowest approval rating of any mayor in recorded polling history, down to 25%. So his odds of re-election don't look good even without the legal woes. So, I've heard a rumor. It might be a win-win for everybody, including our city. Trump pardons him and brings him into the Trump administration. I don't think he's appointed a single African-American to any senior position. So it would, that might be a plus. And I've heard, put him in charge of HUD or something like that. And so the city can move on without him, and sort of a crippled mayor under indictments, et cetera. So I'm actually not. Maybe there's a 50-50 chance I'm running against him in the June 24th primary, that he's still in the race. Obviously, the big thing looming over the entire field is, does Cuomo get into the race? And I am assuming that he will. He's certainly given every indication. And people ask me, well, how are you going to deal with that? And I was like, my message is still the same. If you're fed up and want change, I'm the only change candidate in the race. I'm the only person who's not a career politician. I'm the only person with a business background. Cuomo's entry in the race doesn't change that statement one bit.
So Whitney, how do you feel about the incoming Trump administration as it relates to the border crisis, as it relates to migrants in the city, and what do you think about Eric Adams' handling of it, and handling of this crisis for New York, and what would yours look like?
Yeah. I mean, big picture, going back to this sudden influx of migrants, almost 250,000 a few years ago, that was going to be difficult for anyone to handle. But the fact that he is not a good manager and doesn't have good people working for him means that it was really a botched response, and a difficult crisis. A difficult situation was turned into a real crisis, both for the city and for the migrants who aren't being properly helped. And I have a lot of sympathy for them. I used to live in Nicaragua. I've traveled in every country in Central America. I know the conditions that they are fleeing, and I might do the same if I were in their shoes. That said, and by the way, they're technically legal here. They are asylum seekers, right? Which is different from illegal immigrants who, there are 500,000 of them who've been here long term. In terms of today's news, where the Trump administration is promising big raids, et cetera, I think there's some nuance here that's important, which is I believe and support New York's sanctuary city legislation going back to 1979 under Ed Koch, under Giuliani, Bloomberg, et cetera, where the 500,000 and now the 250,000 people who are here, the 500,000 not legally, the 250,000 actually legally here. We're not going to, we as a city should not cooperate with just trying to deport the law abiding ones who are working hard and who may have US born, i.e. US citizen children, et cetera. On the other hand, any of them that are out there committing mayhem, committing felonies, part of gangs, who are on the terrorist watch list, who are wanted by, Venezuela or Mexico or other countries for committing murders in those countries, we should absolutely be cooperating with whoever is president, the federal authorities. That's common sense and safety for all of us. And the enhanced sanctuary city legislation that the city council passed in 2014 and 2018 in particular, basically put an end to all that cooperation. So you have, abominations like a couple months ago when that Venezuelan gang member assaulted one of Alvin Bragg's ADAs and terrorized her and all. And it turns out it was his 7th arrest last year. I don't understand why he wasn't turned over to ICE and put on the next plane back to Venezuela on the first arrest, right? So, interestingly, I sort of agree with Mayor Adams in terms of cooperating with the feds on a very limited basis to go after criminals and people who are endangering us. My concern, though, is you sort of let the Trump administration folks in, and they're just going to go crazy and just start arresting everybody. And it won't just be limited to criminals. And so that's, it makes it hard to cooperate with the Trump administration when you don't have that basic degree of trust. So I'd be curious for your thoughts on it.
Well, it's interesting, right? We talk about Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua is a $15 million wealth business throughout 8 different South American countries and right now spread throughout this entire country. And you know best, you spent time in South America. So you know the conditions. We're bringing these third world problems to a first world nation. So what is your position then as far as being a sanctuary city? Would you have an executive order to not be a sanctuary city, or would you have amendments? Because they said you would want to work with federal partners on a limited basis. So do you stand for sanctuary city? What would be your conditions to work with your federal partners?
Yeah, I mean, it's really quite simple. I'd keep the original sanctuary city that we've been under for, 40 plus years, keep that in place and roll back the 2014-2018 legislation the city council passed that has resulted, for example, in a 95% decrease in the number of persons of interest notifications from the federal government to the city, which lets local law enforcement know, who's on the terrorist watch list, who's wanted for crimes in other countries. And by the way, I put the ICE office as part of that. There used to be an ICE office at Rikers. I think it's crazy if someone's committing crimes, serious crimes, not broken taillight crimes in this city, serious enough to be sent to Rikers, which costs taxpayers, by the way, more than $500,000 a year to put someone in Rikers. If someone's committing someone like that gang member we were talking about, there should be an ICE office at Rikers so that we can get them out of our city. And by the way, get them off our taxpayer rolls, what we're paying for them.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic of Rikers, I think that is the highlight in mismanagement in government. These are people that are locked up. They're without most of their constitutional rights. They're in 4 walls. We can't keep them safe from themselves. We can't keep drugs out of the prison. We can't stop suicide. We failed with mental health. We failed with keeping correction officers safe. Basically everything. What are your thoughts? And this is all my opinion, by the way. I mean, I haven't really met anyone that doesn't agree with me, but I mean, I'm just curious your thoughts on Rikers, your thoughts on the borough-based jails. Like, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? What does Rikers? What does the Department of Correction and Rikers look like under you as mayor? Yeah,
I was just at Rikers just last week. And it's everything you say. It's incredibly dilapidated, dangerous for the corrections officers and for the inmates. The levels of violence there are off the charts. It's a stain on our city and on our country. The problems there are very, very deep. I've just seen some of the data. 20+% of the people there are diagnosed severe mental illness. Another 30-40% have some sort of mental illness. A quarter have opiate addiction, alcohol addiction. So And as one of the people there I talked to said, nobody comes out of here better than when they came in. So, and I just learned that 75% of the people who are released from Rikers, because it's a jail, so it's sort of short term, 75% are right back in no time. And so we need to just do a massively better job with Rikers. The corrections officers, 2,000 have retired in the past few years, and only 500 have been hired. So they're really, the problems in the NYPD are times 10, out there on Rikers, both in terms of the caliber of the folks and the training they receive, but also just being short-staffed. So it's a really tough problem. So the city council in 2019, as you're referring to, is passed a law to close Rikers down. It's supposed to happen in 2.5 years. Nobody thinks that's going to happen, but they're building 4 facilities in 4 of the 5 boroughs. Honestly, I think it was probably a bad idea back then. Tear down Rikers and rebuild on Rikers made sense. The problem is we're now 5 years into it. There's been a lot of investment in building the new facilities. And if you tried to rescind that, you've wasted all that money. And you're now talking rebuilding, at Rikers, you don't have a new facility until 2040 or something. So we may be stuck with the existing system. My biggest concern is that there aren't enough beds being built. And so that's going to result in a few. There's 6,600 people at Rikers, and there may be 4,000 beds being constructed that will eventually be constructed. And so nobody satisfactorily answered the question, what do you do with the other 2,600? And I don't think we can actually close Rikers. I mean, Rikers is 10 different facilities. So maybe over time you sort of close the worst ones and all. But, there may be a hybrid answer where you have the new facilities in the boroughs. And by the way, secure hospital beds are an important part of this, not just jails, because some of these people just need mental health treatment. They aren't even competent to stand trial. But there may be a part of Rikers that may stay open indefinitely, but you got to tear down the dilapidated, dangerous buildings. My understanding is that one of the most dangerous things about Rikers, where do the inmates get the weapons, the shanks, to really hurt themselves and hurt other people? The violence is they get it from the building themselves, the broken metal and plexiglass and so forth. Right. There are areas because the buildings are so old, designed poorly. There are areas where the cameras don't see where violence can occur. The whole thing, there's no question, Rikers, the existing facilities need to be torn down. The question is do some of the facilities you rebuild, are they on Rikers Island to supplement the borough-based solution?
I think the common theme, right? We look at Department of Education and we look at Fire Department, Sanitation. We look at, of course, Rikers with corrections. And, of course, our forte, New York City Police Department, is mismanagement. This entire administration comes down to mismanagement by failure of nepotism and also, which I say equates to corruption. So here you are, almost 20 years, you manage a hedge fund. You must be saying, wow, if I ran a hedge fund like this, I'd be out of business. But the bottom line is we're looking at mismanagement, right?
Yeah.
We talk about leadership. I think MTA is the most mismanaged organization ever. I mean, they can't handle any funding. We can give $50 for congestion pricing right now, and the MTA would still screw it up. What are your thoughts on congestion pricing? And do you see that this would actually stay at $9? Do you foresee that this is going to get larger? Do you think that this will actually have an impact on the MTA and change anything? Right. What are your thoughts on this congestion pricing?
Well, I think right now we have the worst of both worlds, which is it's a tax that's a regressive tax that's really aggravating to people, but you're not really getting rid of congestion. I'd love to be the mayor that gets rid of all congestion in New York. I've been to Singapore, and there's some other cities that have really done congestion pricing right. So, what's magical about south of 60th Street? I sit in traffic on the Cross Bronx, right? The way Singapore does it is the whole city's congestion price, and the price varies by the hour. And sometimes it's free during off-peak times. And other times the price is quite high, and everybody knows what it is. And if you want to come in at peak rush hour on a normally heavily congested road, that might cost you, who knows, $20 or something like that. If you come in during off hours, it's free, and the price changes by the hour. So that would be my long-term vision. I like the concept of congestion pricing, not as a tax or a revenue raiser, but to get rid of congestion. Congestion is a scourge of this city. It slows up businesses. It really affects quality of life. People miss flights. It's bad for tourism. And it's obviously bad for residents and someone commuting in. If I could tell someone commuting into Midtown to a professional coming in from Westchester or something that, okay, you're going to have to pay $20 if you want to come in during peak hour, but your commute, I guarantee, will only be half an hour. It won't be an hour and a half. You won't be sitting in traffic on the West Side Highway. I think that's a trade-off people would be willing to make. By the way, one other thing is I learned from the police officers in the 18th precinct, they're paying to go to work. They're paying the $9. And I've talked to school teachers who are being charged as congestion pricing to go to work as city employees. And $9, every single day, that adds up for people on city salaries. So I was shocked to hear that. I was like, wait a second, you don't get an exemption? And they're like, well, not yet. That's terrible.
Would you work to give some type of exemption for city employees?
Sure, absolutely.
And so, Whitney, the other thing I think a big issue that everybody's facing, not just in transit but on the streets of New York, is homelessness coupled with mental illness. Obviously, New York City budget has a large, vast budget to deal with these crises, but doesn't feel like it's being spent very well, and it doesn't feel like it's solution based, and it appears the problem's getting worse. Right. What would your administration do to try to alleviate some of the mental illness and homelessness that we're seeing down in the subways and on the streets?
Yeah, my commitment to New York City voters is simple. I'm going to end street homelessness, and very simply by starting with forbidding it. It is the law right now. No one is allowed to spend the night in Central Park, Prospect Park, any public park in New York City. You're not allowed to spend the night there. I don't see why you're allowed to spend the night on the sidewalks or in the subways either. Now, the first, it's just not normal. It's not acceptable for anybody to be sleeping on our streets or subways or parks. That said, I am not talking about criminalizing homelessness. I am not saying, we're just going to throw people in Rikers. That is not the answer. As you point out, this is rooted. Almost all of these are single. We're talking now about the street homeless. And there's actually some good news here in that it is a manageable problem. About 90% of the homeless in New York City have a roof over their heads every night. It's an expensive system. It does not run very well. Many of the shelters are dangerous, et cetera, and we have to fix that. But the reality is we've covered 90% of the problem. For example, Los Angeles, it's only 30%. 70% of the homeless in LA are out on the streets, right? We've got 90% of the problem, at least under some degree of service. And so it's the remaining 10% that we need to address. And this is only about 4,000 people in a city of over 8 million people. Like, we should be able, given the amount of money we're spending and the somewhat manageable size of this problem, this is a solvable problem. So I would give the borough presidents, if I take office a year from now, give them 10 months maybe till the upcoming winter, November of 2026. And you've got to create 10% more capacity. First, for the drop-in shelters, which are the immediate place that anyone out on the streets would be taken to. Then the sort of intermediate term shelters. And long-term, we got to build a lot more housing in this city, which affects affordability. A lot of people become homeless simply because they can't pay the rent, right? And so there's sort of a short, intermediate, and long-term issue. And one other thing is I'm going to call on the state. You've got to create more long-term psychiatric beds. Some of these people just need to be basically institutionalized. Sounds like a bad word, but look what the suffering on the streets of these people who are mentally ill. And I learned just yesterday, in the 1950s, there were almost 100,000 New Yorkers in psychiatric hospitals, long-term psychiatric care. 100,000. We're down to 3,500 today. There's been like a 95% deinstitutionalization by the state of people with mental illness. And I've heard stories where, it's like, what did you do with them when you shut down the hospital that was caring for them? And the answer was, we gave them a ticket to the Port Authority. They shut down mental health hospitals and sent people here to New York, where they end up on our subways, and they are suffering. And they're severely affecting quality of life here in New York. So I'm going to raise a big stink about the New York State basically hurting our city by not caring for people that need care.
I think we discussed a lot of issues here. Definitely covered a lot of ground. There's a lot of layers to pull back. We'd love to have you back on here going further in the future, discuss more of these topics. But so with that being said, what separates you from other candidates at this point? Why would we elect Whitney Tilson? Obviously, you have a great background with a hedge fund, and you have experience traveling. And I think that traveling, especially different parts of the world, especially third world parts of this world, really broaden your mindset. I've spent a lot of time in Asia myself, Singapore. So what separates you from the other candidates? Why would we pick you for mayor?
Yeah. Well, big picture, I'm just a fed up citizen who loves this city, and I'm terribly concerned it's heading in the wrong direction at an alarming pace, not just crime, but affordability, our schools, et cetera. And we can't blame the Republicans. I wish I could point the finger at the other team, but we got to look in a mirror and say it's on us. And I see a party that is my party has become bloated, corrupt, beholden to special interests. And in particular, we're electing our mayor in a system that's rigged to depress turnout. Last election, it was only 26% of registered Democrats voted. So basically 404,000 people last election was the total number of votes in the 8th round of ranked choice voting, elected Mayor Adams. So 5% of New Yorkers elected the mayor. Well, is it any surprise that the mayor and our career politicians running this city aren't really looking out for, average New Yorkers? Because that isn't who elected them. There's a handful of special interest groups that they're now beholden to and who they owe their political future to. So if I'm elected, I will have won as a change candidate from outside the system who won't owe anything to anyone, and I will be a huge change agent. So the message, if you boil it down, is pretty simple. If you're fed up and you want change, there's a bunch of career politicians. If you like the status quo, if you think the career politician doing a great job managing the city, I'm not your guy. There's a half dozen other career politicians out there who will say all the right things and have good speechwriters. But if you don't buy it anymore, if you're fed up and you want change and you want someone with a business background who's not a career politician, who's going to be completely independent of all these special interest groups and owe his election strictly to the people of New York, I'm your guy.
I love it. Listen, I think, we thank the cops that recommended you to come on here. We thank you for coming on here, sharing your platform. I will say, though, we have a retired NYPD inspector on here, Ron Layson. He said, refer the complaint, not the complainant. So I think, to the cops that are listening, that you did refer Whitney to here. Should have just took the complaint for you when you had the problem. That's not how New Yorkers reporting crime should be treated. You shouldn't have had to wait all those hours. That should have been a very simple solution fix. And, we wish you luck in the thing. If we could do anything to help you, keep in touch. And we'd love to discuss further any issues, any questions you would have, or if you'd like to hear anything we're advocating for, we'd love to speak with you further.
All right. Thank you. It's a pleasure sitting with you this morning, talking to you.
It's been a pleasure to meet you. But last thing before you leave, we did the same thing with Jim Wallen. Just a little fun. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. He told us he's into movies. He's like Foo Fighters. Yep. Tell us a little bit about you before you leave, just so we know, Whitney, who you are.
Yeah, I'm sort of an adrenaline junkie and into extreme sports. Remember that movie Free Solo, the guy who climbed the nose of El Cap in Yosemite, 3,000-foot sheer wall. I got inspired by that movie. I went out and climbed it, but with ropes and with a guide. But it's 4 days up there on the rock. I've climbed the Matterhorn, the Eiger. So I love mountaineering. I also do endurance races, Tough Mudder and Spartan races. I'm the all-time record holder in the 50 and older age group at the World's Toughest Mudder, which is a 24-hour, one of the world's most notorious endurance races.
That's the Mother Tough Mudder, right?
I'm sorry?
That's called the Mother Tough Mudder, right?
World's Toughest Mudder is what it's called. I've done it 7 times. I've won it. I've won my age group 2 or 3 times and set the all-time record of 75 miles a number of years ago. And so, barbed wire, electric shocks, whatever. I've done training, couple weekends of training with the Navy SEALs where they put us through sort of a Bud's Light like experience out there. So I guess to some extent, I'd say this is relevant because I'm signing up to try and do one of the hardest jobs in the world that's going to require a lot of mental and physical endurance. And I'm going to get attacked from all sides and all. And I sort of smile and say, there isn't anything you can do to me that isn't worse than the World's Toughest Mudder or some Navy SEAL nightmare drill sergeant, making us suffer in the middle of the night. So one of the reasons I do it is I like that challenge of being pushed mentally and physically further than I've ever been pushed before and overcoming that. Right. So that's a little piece of me that I think is actually relevant. It's good practice for hopefully getting this job. Certainly, even for the campaign, is quite a grueling challenge. And then if you actually win, it's 4 more years at least, hopefully 8.
Absolutely. So listen, we appreciate you. Thank you for taking time out, and please keep in touch with us, and thank Jennifer for us too. And,
all right.
We'll be in touch. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Whitney, great to meet you. Take care.
All right. I mean, I thought that was listen. I hear competence. I hear competence. Something I don't hear currently in New York City government. Obviously, there's tons of nuances in every position, and I'll tell you right now, there's no candidate that I'm gonna that we're gonna interview, or I'm gonna meet, or even candidates that I could potentially have supported in the past. There's no issues that I agree with everybody on totally. If Eric ran for mayor today, there's going to be some things that I'm going to be like, I don't think that that's right. And that's just, I think that's what, where we should be. We should understand the issues, have our positions. And, I respect all of these candidates for first throwing their name in the hat, because it's more than the rest of us are doing, right? They want to take on this challenge, and then to come on a platform that really it's a blue collar police platform. And I think, I appreciate Whitney, and I appreciate anybody else that comes on here. I think we're going to have Scott Stringer on here. We're going to have Zohan Mamarani. We're going to have a lot of mayoral candidates come on this cycle, as well as, as the city council races come and all that. And this is what America is. We're supposed to hear thoughts. We're supposed to hear platforms. I know you guys aren't big fans of congestion pricing. It sounds like he is. I'm not a huge fan of it myself, but I see both sides of the coin. So it depends. But he's willing to give an exemption to city workers, and I think that's something that Jim also alluded to too. It's something that he didn't say he would get rid of congestion pricing totally. He said that in the long term, maybe it's something to explore. But there's a lot of nuances in every situation. But I think overall, I like people that are competent. I like people that have management skills. And the 2 candidates that we have had on here, Jim and Whitney, have both exhibited both of those traits to me.
Well, there's no doubt about it. What the common theme that we saw with Jim and also Whitney today is that it's something I used to always tell my cops, right? Is competence brings confidence. So clearly they're both competent, and they're both confident. I thought they both show humility also. Do I agree with every stance on Jim and also with Whitney? Absolutely not. But I think I give them a lot of credit. They showed courage for coming on the podcast, and a long form platform is this, where we really get to see who they are. And it was a rapid fire. We threw a lot of questions at them. We threw a lot of questions at Whitney. I don't agree with everything. Listen, I understand his position, of course, is to continue a sanctuary city. I don't agree with that. But the bottom line is he did give us his platform, and that's the beauty of that long platform, is you have an opportunity to decide, and you make the decision. Is this someone that would work for you? Is this someone that works for the city? One thing, there's a fact. He ran a hedge fund for almost 20 years, so he has leadership experience, and he knows how to manage an organization, which is one thing that's lacking in this city right now. So it can't be any worse than what we have with Eric Adams. I can tell you right now, if you would have picked Jim or you would have picked Whitney, I think we'd be in a far better position than we are with Eric Adams. There's no doubt about it. At least these men
100%.
have right? There's no doubt about it. That's what I'm saying. 100%, and do I agree? Right now, he's talking about an individual basis when it comes to bringing people back for the mandate. But I think that one thing that's a common theme also is I don't think that Jim and Whitney are completely educated when it comes to what happened with the mandate. There's a lot of information missing. But one thing is true. I think they're willing to speak and to have conversations with it. And that's what we want. We want people that are willing to talk, that are approachable. And I can see that. I mean, listen, he talks about going out there, doing challenges, rock climbing and doing Tough Mudder. So that says a lot about him. He's willing to put himself in the face of adversity, and so is Jim. So I appreciate both of these fine men for coming on this podcast. And I'm sure a lot of people say, oh, why did he say this? Why is you're not going to agree? And John, you're 100% right, because you and I disagree and agree on stuff all the time. If I was running for mayor, you would say, "Oh, I agree with that," or "I don't." And we walk, we both have very similar views, and some things we have differences. That's the beauty about it. That's why you have to vote. And what do you say, John? Not even 500,000 people voted for Eric Adams. So again, we suffer from voter apathy. If you don't like him, or you do like him, you got to get out there and vote.
Voter apathy, in Sal Greco's term, low information, right? People with low information and voter apathy. That's exactly what it is. That's New York's main problem. People don't understand the issues, and you don't even know the issues, nor do you know the candidates' positions. And that's why them coming on and willing to speak in long form, I don't care if I totally disagreed on every issue, which I don't think I do with anybody at this point yet. I don't think we've had anyone on here that I've completely disagreed with on every issue. I don't even know if it'll happen. But when you hear it in long form, you get to know the candidates. You know who they are. You know who this guy is, and then you make an informed decision. And that's what America is. That's what it is, And so, shout out to Whitney for coming on. I thought it was a great interview. What you think about that though? That was like, I kept sticking with me like that. He gets his bike stolen, and then he's waiting out 3 hours in the cold, and they go back to the scene of the crime. What were you doing? Were you taking prints at the scene of the crime? Like, did you take prints for the bike? Did you collect video? What'd you do with the video? What'd you think about that? I mean, that really annoyed me, dude. I was like, wow, I would have never. If I was in anti-crime and he came up to me, and it's not my job to do that, I would have just took the report from him. I would have been like, yeah, no problem. I don't want people standing out here, and I would try to help people. Like, you're gonna give the guy shift and move around and do this. No, and never mind the fact the guy's running for mayor. He's still giving him the runaround. Like, he's not even just a regular guy on the street. The guy's like, yeah, I might be the next mayor in New York City. By the way, I fundraise. He's up there in the fundraising as well. He fundraised a lot of money, just like Jim did in a very short period. What'd you think about that?
That always drives me crazy. First of all, it drives me nuts. But what does that come down to, John? It's everything we've been saying. It's failed supervision. If you had the right leadership in place, that wouldn't have happened that day. If you had the right sergeant and lieutenant in the precinct at the time and commanding officer, if you have the right leadership and it's managed properly, that wouldn't happen. And this entire police department is mismanaged right now. That's been the theme forever. Don't get me wrong. Even with this administration, it would happen. But I would always make sure that would not happen, because I never understood this idea. If you're lazy and you're trying to take shortcuts, in the end, you end up spending more time on it. When we find out you didn't do a proper investigation, I would make my guys do everything completely thorough. But what does it also expose? Exposes the NYPD is not this racist organization that's been painted out. What we have, unfortunately, sometimes is just pure laziness, mismanaged. That's where we need to fix, because Whitney's not a black man that came for help from the police department. He's a white man, and he was treated the same way as unfortunately, he was, he said he was treated professional because he doesn't know the inner workings of the police department. But there was a missing component here. They should have put him in the car, taken him to the scene. That's the opportunity when you drive to the scene to start to create that dialogue, to find out what's going on. I would always say that's part of your investigation. So there's mismanagement there. I don't know. I'm not going to blame the cops completely, because I will say this. I've seen in precincts where, unfortunately, cops are lazy because the opposition, the pressure that they get internally from their mismanagement, their failed leadership. Because that cop might have said, hey, I want to go to the sergeant and ask the sergeant to get a car to take this guy to the scene to do an investigation. And maybe that sergeant would say, I don't have enough cars, or whatever the case is. So I'm not just going to blame the cops, because I've seen it on both ends. Sometimes the cops exhibit pure laziness, but sometimes we see it's failed parts on the leadership. Maybe they're not giving the amenities and the tools for this police officer to do their job. So I see it on both ends.
No, yeah, listen, I don't think the cops are going to, how the precinct is. And these guys are so short-staffed. They're not going to take him in the car back to the scene. Like, once he went, I'm saying at the scene of the crime, the report should have been taken right there. If the report wasn't taken right there, he showed up at the precinct, the report should have been taken. Let's not pretend like we're going out and getting ECT out there and they're dusting for prints and swabbing for DNA. It's not happening. Listen, bikes get stolen in New York City. They're in the wind. Chances of getting the bike back, not very good. how far the detectives are going to go to find who tracked down who got the bike. They're not going to do the same type of investigation they did for Luigi Mangione. It's not possible. So it is what it is. It's not a knock on anybody. I'm saying at least take the report. Don't give this guy the runaround, is what I'm saying. Don't make him stand out. And that's anybody. Don't make them stand out there for 3 hours. I don't know. That annoyed me. I'm not. But I agree with you. It all falls back on failed management because it is possible. Why are you taking the report for that guy? That's not your sector. That's not your job. That's not what you do. Blah blah blah. It always goes back to that. But I'm saying, even with that, just show some humanity, dude. What if that was your dad? What if that was your mom? What if that was your wife? Like, you want people standing out there for 3 hours to take a report that's going to take you 3 seconds? Just do it. Just take the report.
But first of all, I don't even know why it's taking 3 hours anyway. That to me, that's a simple, especially NYPD, the volume that we deal with. Bing, bam, boom. Let's get that report done. You know what? That's another indication why I always say you need anti-crime. Because a good anti-crime guy or a conditions unit, they'll find that bike. We used to do that all the time. Every day, we would do crime analysis in transit. We would go through all the reports, and my guys were very good. They knew the property missing from burglaries. They knew the property missing when it came to bikes. We used to have, especially in the Lower East Side, we would have that bike bait program all the time, and people would come from Inside News, and they would film, we would watch the guys steal the bikes. Also with cars, too. We used to do bait car. But the bottom line is this. Anti-crime conditions units, those guys would find those bikes. We used to do it all the time. So we're missing a key element here.
New York's such a crazy place, dude. The last guy locked up for stealing a bike, it was freezing one night, doing anti-crime, driving down the block.
It's always cold out.
It's freezing, right? And there's this black dude out there. He's the only guy on the street. He's on like 18th Avenue in Southern Brooklyn, and he's got a big pair of pliers, and he's snipping a bike chain. So I had dealt with the guy before, a homeless guy, little not right in his head. So we rolled up. I get out of the car. I'm like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm trying to steal this bike." So I'm like, "Dude, what the hell?" I'm like, "Bro, what are you doing? Get out of here!" Like, he's like, "Nah, man." He's like, "Please lock me up." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, He goes, "I need to go to jail. I'm going to die out here." I was like, "I'll take you to the shelter. You want to go?" Like, "I don't want you to freeze out here." He's like, "I'm going to die out here. I'm not going to the shelter. It's dangerous." He refused to go to the shelter. He's like, "If you leave me here, I'm going to smash the window, and then you're going to come back and break and lock me up." But I was like, "Well, I can't lock you up for the bike. I don't know whose bike this is that you're stealing." I was like, "I can't. Who's my complainant? I can't lock you up, even if you strip the chain." I was like, "I can't lock you up for it." And he goes, "Well, I just stole these pliers from the hardware store down the block." So I was like, "You serious?" He's like, "Yeah." So I take him down to the hardware store. The guy's like, "Yeah, he just ran in here, grabbed them, and snatched them." So we took him in for petty larceny. Dude, he was thanking us up and down. He's like, "I was gonna die out there tonight." And he's like, "Thank you for arresting me." He was like, "My next thing, I was gonna smash the window to set the alarm off." I was like, sad state of affairs in New York, bro. Real sad. And that was a long time ago. That was probably like 10 years ago. But I'll never forget that. I felt so bad, dude. I think I gave him $20 too. I was like, "Here for when you get out or whatever." And I offered him a million different things. He's like, "No, I want to get locked up." He goes, "I'm getting locked up tonight. I want to go to jail. I know what it's like there. I want to go there." I'm like, "Okay."
Patrick Donahue said here, he's absolutely right. Like the fact that he actually waited 3 hours over a stolen bike is very telling. Yes, I know some bikes cost $1,000, but where's the common sense? I get it. Bike's important to him. I wouldn't wait 3 hours for a bike either. I mean, it's unfortunate, but these things do happen. It happened to me actually in LA. Stupid me. I was in a pickup truck. I bought my son a brand new bike. We were hungry, so we decided to go get something to eat. I had it in the back of the pickup, and I totally forgot. Sure enough, I came back. I came outside. That bike was gone. So, you know what? Stupid me. Did I go out and make a report and stuff? Could I? Yeah, but I said, you know what? I made a stupid mistake, and I went out and I sucked it up, and I bought a new bike. But unfortunately, and I know he put a lock on it, but even sometimes you put a lock on it, it's just an obstacle. They cut right through it. I used to see the Lower East Side. We used to watch from the rooftops. If people have bikes out, especially delivery guys, forget about cutting the lock. These guys used to have their own locks. They would come and put a lock on the bike so that if someone came out, they couldn't get to the bike. And then they would go out trying to figure out how to get that bike back. In the meantime, they would then take the lock off and the bike would be gone. I mean, this is what goes on in the city, unfortunately. But I do expect the cops to do the best job they can do. And it's unfortunate. We see lazy cops. There's no doubt about it. We do see lazy cops. but we also see I show the fault mostly on the leadership and complete mismanagement. It would happen all the time in housing. I worked in housing, and that was the one thing I hate. People would be treated like a yo-yo with a ping pong. I hate that. They would come to the housing location. Guys would, oh, no, you have to go to the 4-0 precinct. The 4-0 precinct would then send them back to housing. I mean, these people would go back and forth. That's ridiculous. And this is how you treat people? Meanwhile, cops are the most oppressive. You call people up. Let's say you have a problem with your credit card. You call American Express. You call this one. I say, how do you feel when they send you to this department and just keep bouncing you around? That's what you're doing to these people. So I would never do that. It's wrong.
Yeah, Mark the Mock says, I recall those in the 7-7, John. We had one where the guy broke into a car on Nostrand and was waiting for us in the passenger seat. Yeah, that was always like, dude, that's always sat with me. That was always like a sad thing. I was like, wow, all the money we spend in this city, we can't help these people. We can't get these guys on the right path, get them, find some job for them, get them, set them in like some type of, even if it's not a shelter, like some type of halfway house living until they could get on their feet. Really annoyed me, dude. Like I said, it's just. I listen. I think that they're complex issues, but I think that I think that the mismanagement has really made them even worse. Like I think there's a lot of common sense issues that could come out of politicians in New York City with the amount of money we're spending that could really benefit not only the people suffering through homelessness or mental health issues or drug addicted, but also that would improve public safety greatly. And a lot of these issues that we're facing, I think a lot of simple solutions could solve them. Crazy times. This just came out this morning. This is from Craig McCarthy in the Post. A socialite who co-founded a charity with Mayor Eric Adams' brother hitched a ride to President Trump's inauguration with his own security detail in what experts call a prime example of City Hall's ethical sloppiness. What do you think about that? So NYPD vehicles are going down, taxpayer funded. They're going down. Kaz Daughtry's probably on overtime. I don't know why he's not on overtime and why he's on overtime and John Shell isn't. So I don't know how many of his 7 Craylo cars that they took down there. But they take all of these taxpayer funds to go down to this inauguration, really for no benefit to the taxpayers in New York City. What do you think about that? And then his brother's business partner is basically jumping in the car with the NYPD to ride down there. A violation of NYPD rules, by the way.
Well, I can tell you right now, it's just a big dog and pony show just to say they were there. Because I can tell you right now, it was a shit show, but there was security all over the place. It was uniformed Secret Service. You had the Metro cops out everywhere. You had National Guard everywhere, dressed to the 9. There was plenty of security. The NYPD didn't need to be there. That was there just for a show, just to say they were there. It was plenty of security. Plenty. I'm sure everybody was out in full force from the Metro cops that were there. You had all the uniformed Secret Service. The NYPD did not need to be there. Not at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you get a chance to watch the Tucker Carlson interview with Eric Adams?
No, I didn't get a chance because I was in transit yesterday. I was exhausted. By the time I actually got back and got my car and got home, I only had a couple hours sleep. So I didn't get a chance to watch it yet, but we spoke about it offline. I did hear some grumblings. I can't wait to watch it. But I could also just close my eyes right now and I can envision what Eric Adams said or didn't say.
Without knowing, so you didn't watch it, and we'll talk about like your thoughts tomorrow that you watched it, but without watching it, what'd you think about even hearing that he went on Tucker Carlson? Like, what are your thoughts, just the fact that he's on there right on the heels of attending the inauguration, running out at 3:00 in the morning when someone in the Trump camp called him and said, oh yeah, you can come.
So to me, it's like this twist of fate that's going on here. It's unbelievable. Like, even Whitney said, right? Whitney said it. You said it. I say it. Sal Greco says it. Right? The lines have been blurred in New York where it's like one party rule. But it's not even the Democrats that are pushing Eric Adams. It's all of a sudden we have all these silent, quiet Republicans that are pushing Eric Adams. Eric Adams is going MAGA. And to me, him going on Tucker, to me, initially I was saying it looks like Trump is toying with Eric Adams. But the fact that he's going on Tucker and I haven't saw it yet, to me, is an indication that he actually might get a preemptive pardon. To me, it's every indication that the Republicans are really starting to back him and he's become this MAGA Eric. That's what I see. Jesse James, by the way, there's a couple people missing. I apologize. Coffee and donuts, $4.99. When I worked at the 2-8, I was on the TS, and a dude came in, dropped crack on the ground, purposely just to get locked up. He wanted a place to sleep. Speaking of crack, I'll never forget, brand new, working the 120 precinct. John, remember we had foot posts all along Jersey Street? There was this crackhead who was hysterical, and he would collect $1 from every cop until he would get $10 and go buy a dime bag of crack. And so we were supporting this guy's habit until we realized what the hell we were doing. But VSS Ventura, shout out to you, brother. $5 coffee and donuts. Morning and welcome back, Eric. The Great Orange Imperium has been established, and let that freedom ring. Damn it! Speaking of freedom ring, man, woo! That was powerful. I watched that speech. I watched it in the bar. You put it on the podcast. Oh my God, powerful! That was amazing. When you talk about freedom ring from the mountains, from the hills, unbelievable. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was a great speech. I think it was a motivating day, but it was also, me and Sal, when you were out yesterday, we talked about it a little. Like, I woke up in the morning and I was like, I can't believe that this is even a thing, that we could give someone who hasn't been charged with a crime. There's no active investigation against this person, and yeah, we're just going to pardon you. Because more than likely you committed some crimes, and if anyone investigates you, you're gonna probably go to jail the rest of your life. And I think I think it's disgusting. Like, I support the president's ability to pardon people. I support especially people that have been imprisoned for 4+ years without a trial, without being brought up on charges. I support the president's ability to override wrongs in the justice system. But here we have a person who hasn't been arrested, who's not locked up, who hasn't been investigated, nothing. And we're just pardoning people like Fauci, the January 6th committee, Mark Milley. And I think that the power is wrong. And I think when I look at it being done and being spoke about to be given to Eric Adams, I also think it's wrong. I'm like, I don't support it for one and not the other. Like, what are your thoughts on preemptive pardons, Eric?
Well, you and I spoke about this. I think it's ridiculous because at this point we anticipate superseding indictments, and this whole thing came out about Diddy. We don't know. Is there a connection with Adams to Diddy? I would like to know. Did he take part in sex parties? Who not forget about taking part in sex parties, but what if he's part of this whole thing? I'm not saying he did. But what if he's part of this thing of drugging men and possibly raping them? We don't even know. I think a preemptive pardon is crazy. We need to let things play out first before we decide. I get it. People that do extensive time in jail, and clearly they pay their debt to society, and there's no reason to keep them imprisoned and give them a pardon in certain circumstances where people have done humanitarian work and it overshadows. But Eric Adams is no humanitarian. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I like Stephen S. says only the convicted should receive a pardon, and so I supported the pardon of Roger Stone. I thought that was good. I support the pardon of the January 6th defendants. There were people who pushed cops who got 7 years in jail. I mean, that's crazy to me. I think time served is fine. And so a lot of people had their sentences commuted too. So meaning they didn't actually receive a pardon, but like, you served enough time, see you later for the crimes you had. And, I think January 6th is another thing where you saw like a huge failure in management and law enforcement. How they even allowed people to get near the Capitol is beyond me. That was like, watching that, I was like, how the hell are you opening the gates and letting? Obviously, you're creating a funnel now, and you're creating a very hostile, bad situation. Keep people back, let them chant and yell. They'll go away and they'll leave. Now let's open up the gates. Come closer. All right, open up the next barrier. Let them come closer, and we'll wave them in. Obviously, to me, that was either purposely created or it was a glaring failure and absolutely how not to run a security detail, and should be studied going forward. Yeah, so crazy things, man. I was like, I'm still shocked about the Kaz overtime thing. I didn't think he earned any overtime in 2024.
To me, I think that's completely to me that violates every city charter law. As far in policy, as far as to my knowledge, I didn't even know that these deputy commissioners could make overtime. It's quite interesting. They've circumvented every policy when it comes to this administration, these promotions by rocket fuel. So it doesn't surprise me. Now, Sherry says here, good morning, Sherry, by the way. She says, I believe, hold on, let me go back to this because these things are flying in. I believe you have to plead guilty to be pardoned. You know what, Sherry, I agree with you. I think you should have to plead guilty. But we should be aware of what crimes you committed. And that's why I'm against these preemptive pardons. I agree with you, John. I think there's a time to pardon people. Absolutely. Some people are political targets, just as we speak about Roger Stone. Some people have done time in jail and they get excessive amount of time. And sometimes the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Sometimes people do humanitarian efforts that really overshadow what they did. But a preemptive pardon, to me, is a huge problem, especially right now with Eric Adams. All we know is about this potential bribery in Turkey, but we see the appearance of impropriety. We have all these investigations going on right now, and we don't know what connections and ties Eric Adams has and his role in it. And also, like I said, the connection with Diddy. Is he involved potentially in some sexual deviant stuff? We don't know. I mean, he does have sexual allegations against him from a woman over 30 years ago. It's just an allegation at this point, right? He has a right to due process, but let's have due process play out before we start with pardons. So I hope that Trump does not destroy his legacy and give him a preemptive pardon and make a huge mistake, because if some superseding information does start to come to light, it's a bad look for Donald Trump. I mean, this is a great opportunity for Donald Trump to have a pure legacy, to be the man that everybody expected. So let's not let Eric Adams does a great job of tarnishing people's names. Tish, she could wipe her name in the toilet right now. And I hope Donald Trump doesn't happen the same.
So something broke yesterday on here. So it's been rumored that John Shell asked for permission to go to Washington, D.C. for a 3-day taxpayer-funded expense trip so they could hobnob with corrupt Republicans and failed Republicans in the New York Republican Party. And Jessica Tish said no, did not approve him to go. And so it's rumored that he then reached out to New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who said, sure, go, and circumvented the police commissioner. And then Kaz Daughtry headed down there, and everybody went for a grand old time of booze and whatever else happened in those 3 days. What do you think about that, if that's true? Boss shopping, chief of department, boss shopping.
Well, we know boss shopping is always a no-no, especially, in the military and especially the police department. You don't break ranks. But we know it's just reflective of what's going on right now. There is no breaking ranks in this case because there is no commissioner. Let's be honest. Eric Adams is the police commissioner. So that's what's been happening. He is the commissioner at this point. Tish, Ed Caban, Sewell, Tom Donlin, the placeholders. Tish is looking like a little bit of like a white horse because she's been part of this exposed this corruption scandal, but it's been kind of a byproduct of the position, it's timing. But Eric Adams, to me, ultimately, he's the police commissioner. So there's no doubt about it. We've seen it on different angles and aspects, and it shows in this case right here, complete disrespect to Jessica Tish. But Jessica Tish took this position knowing that she's going to be leveraged by Eric Adams.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just an abuse, right? It's just complete disrespect, and it's honestly it's expendable. It's you fail to follow a lawful order, you boss shopping. I mean, and again, there's going to be no discipline issued. It's absolutely disgusting. All of these cars were taken down. We're putting people who aren't cops in police cars, taking them on trips to Washington, D.C. 5 hours away. It makes absolutely no sense, man. It makes absolutely no sense. None of it. I think we got to get into the Kaz overtime a little bit more. And I think we got to look at NYPD payroll a little more tomorrow. I really wasn't prepared to speak. I thought, I thought the interview went well. I'm glad Whitney came on. And I'm glad that, we're getting candidates that are willing to take cops back, the cops, firefighters, EMS workers, all the city workers who terminated over the vaccine mandate back to work. So I appreciate the openness and the willing to talk, and I appreciate people coming on this platform. I appreciate you guys for being respectful and hanging with us and joining us this morning. But I think there's this is kind of hard to take in, dude, that like there's a deputy commissioner making overtime. Like, it's very hard for me to take in how this is legal, how everyone wants to crush apps and no one's saying a word about Kaz Daughtry. This should be all over the front cover of the paper. What Sam Antar broke last night should be all over the front cover of the paper last night. I think we got a deep dive into the NYPD payroll and just highlight what's been going on. The fact that someone who's making a very high salary, someone who's running around with credit cards that, in my opinion, if those were looked at, you would see a huge misuse of funds. The one who's misusing taxpayer-funded vehicles now is also getting overtime, continuously getting overtime. I'm flabbergasted. I don't know what to think about it. I want to like take it all in and think about it. I want to go through the data and be more prepared. But I'm telling you right now, it's absolutely disgusting that happened. And I just feel like this Adams administration can't come to an end quick enough.
Well, it's going to come to an end, but it's good for the content for the podcast. We appreciate Eric Adams. But I will say this, Ron Layson, look, we agree again. I can't believe this is 2 in a row. Ron Layson says he is the chief of department. Why is he out of state for a detail like this? I agree. Absolutely. This doesn't make any sense. And from a leadership standpoint, this is complete opposition from group leadership. Why is he out of state for a detail like that? Delegate a chief to oversee the department as the NYPD has always done. Ready for this one? You're absolutely right, Ron Layson. Did Espo go to Katrina? I can tell you right now, I went to Hurricane Katrina. I was there for 3 weeks. No, he actually sent Chief Hall. It would not make sense for chief of department who needs to be at the center in New York City. He can delegate his authority. Absolutely right. You're spot on, Ron Layson.
Yeah, look, this is why he needed to go. Look, see, there's John Schell all the way in the background. He's sitting next to Mark Molinaro, failed New York Republican. Rep D'Esposito, failed New York Republican. And look who's there. Kaz is a Republican now. Juju, I didn't know. Congratulations. It's crazy how an indictment and an election could change so much. It's wild to me. An indictment election. And, you know, at least John Schell's out of the closet now. We've been telling you he's MAGA in the streets, but he's MAGA in the sheets, but woke in the streets. We've been telling you that for 2 years. And now he is now MAGA in the sheets and on the streets. Congratulations, John. Thank you for coming out of the closet finally. You can now voice the things you say at home and to your neighbors and on conservative talk shows. You can now voice it publicly. Congratulations.
Popeye Damon says, Shell thought there was a free meal included. Absolutely. He was feeding himself and his fat triple neck. Everybody was eating here. But listen, that's the bottom line. I think you're absolutely right, John. We're going to take a deep dive. Anybody want to help us? Our friends and listeners, thank you so much. You're a huge help. Anyone here want to jump in and help us and get information? And if you see any patterns or anything we could find out when it comes to overtime with these deputy commissioners, we really need to dive in and do a full investigation on this because this doesn't look right. And unfortunately, the rank and file is paying for every burden that's been put on this management, especially in the NYPD right now. I speak to cops on a daily basis, especially the ICOs, integrity control officers in the precincts. Anybody here that's outside law enforcement from the NYPD, they're actually the rank of lieutenant. These guys are getting so much immense pressure right now to bog down and to control overtime in a precinct in response to what's going on at the upper echelon. That's why shout out to you, Epps, for blowing the whistle on this whole thing. They tried to bury you and put this whole thing on you. And you know what, John? You said it earlier. She's a top earner, but she's not one to get the top amount of overtime in hours.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, they're just looking for fall people now. Unfortunately, I think that there's people that are going to take a hard fall that honestly, they were just going along with the ride. And that's why I said a long time ago, when you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. And unfortunately, I don't feel bad for any of you. You know, you laid down with dogs, you did some shady shit, and now you got to deal with it. Here you go. Deputy Commissioner 2024, Police Department, Kaz Daughtry. Active base salary $276,588. Regular hours $1,985. His regular gross paid $194,458.88. His total overtime paid $110,064.55. His other pay was $24,441, bringing his grand total to $328,964.89. And that is not including all of the money he spent to get nearly every piece of his clothing embroidered with Deputy Commissioner of Operations on his sleeve, on his chest, on his back, on his hat, on the back of his hat. And I want to see these embroidery bills. I want to see these clothing bills, because I'm telling you right now, I think it might even go into the seven figures. It's definitely in six figures. They definitely spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in embroidered clothing. I personally believe it might even be a lot more than that.
Well, Sal Greco says it here. Shout out, brother. Good morning. Sal, thank you for yesterday. You did an awesome job, by the way, man. Seriously. What is he? Sal Greco put it out here. My latest 2 ex-post detailed Kaz Daughtry and his overtime. Sam Antar is God's gift to finance accounting. Yeah, shout out to Sam Antar, man. Seriously, him and Razor Chattery together did a hell of a job putting numbers together, charts together, showing what's going on in the overtime. So hopefully we can dive more into this and find out this overtime. I don't know. Maybe Kaz Daughtry was also getting himself some on-duty booty. I don't know if he was in the back office with Madry. I don't know what goes on there, but sure gets a lot of overtime. There's a lot of questions here, and it's unfortunate. We're making a joke out of this, but the bottom line is I feel sorry for the rank and file that bust their ass in these high-profile precincts that have a propensity for violence, and they're getting suppressed, and they have to explain an hour of overtime on a face-to-face relief or an hour of overtime on a gun arrest. And there's this excessive abuse amount of overtime while these guys are eating like fat rats at Capitol Grill. And some poor cop has to explain, and his supervisor has to do a 49, a form to explain why he had an hour of overtime while Kaz Daughtry is eating his second plate of steak at Capitol Grill. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous how we see the different tiers of the NYPD. No doubt about it, there is a different tiered system in the NYPD.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michael Furia says, at John, Jessica Tisch is minutes, hours, or days away from ending the real-time crime center, sending 17 detectives to squads who were legitimately assigned, but people from Caban's office were able to go to Taru, ? Listen, I'm going to say it again. She's not, listen, I'll give it to her. She managed ITB very well. I don't think she's doing a great job of managing the NYPD, and that's not because I believe that it's her incompetence. I believe it's her compliance with New York City Mayor Eric Adams' orders. So you're going to see a lot of things that make absolutely no sense, and it's because she really is not the police commissioner. So like you could just take Jessica Tisch out of that statement, and you should say the real police commissioner, Eric Adams, who his lackey, Kaz Daughtry, his white glove driver. Kaz Daughtry is the actual police commissioner. John Schell, the chief of department, Kaz Daughtry, the deputy commissioner of operations, all have more authority than Jessica Tisch. And that has been proven over these last few days and these last few weeks. And I don't think anything changes until the Eric Adams administration changes. Jessica Tisch, billionaire heiress, has the ability to be the police commissioner, but she has yet to step into her power. She has yet to me, I would have been like, all right, appoint your 5th police commissioner. This is what we're doing. These guys are out. This is what it is. Appoint your 5th police commissioner, Eric Adams. Go right ahead. Now that you're running over to the New York Republican Party. Absolute joke. So,
yeah, that's my point. That's my point to this, right? I feel at this point, it doesn't matter if it was Sewell, Ed Caban, Tom Donlin, or Jessica Tisch. This corruption exposed was by Epps blowing the whistle on this. This wasn't Jessica Tisch that actually investigated, found this corruption, and said, hey, we have to do something about this. This can of worms opened from the inside, and Jessica Tisch had no point to put a finger on. The only difference is she has some managerial skills, some poise, some distinction, and professionalism, and she did a good job of making the impression and the illusion that this was done under her tenure and under her tutelage and under her leadership. In fact, this was a byproduct that exposed itself. And Jessica Tisch actually failed because she was supposed to suspend Jeffrey Mandry. Jeffrey Mandry was not suspended until the raid by the feds. If that raid never happened, Jeffrey Mandry would have never been suspended. So I don't see any change here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, dude. I totally agree with you. If like as the corruption comes out, you see reactions to the corruption scandals, and that's why they're all looking to pull this away. So listen, let's get into this. Let's get in a little bit more tomorrow. We're going on 2 hours. You got anything? You want to talk about before we run?
No, it works out. I actually got a couple of pressing things to take care of. I want to thank everybody. Like I said, I had a great time at the Veterans Ball with the American Legion. It really was amazing. They honored over 20 Medal of Honor recipients. It was fantastic. Chef Irvine was there. If anybody knows him, plays on different shows. He was a military guy. Talks about cooking, how the passion he has into it. Pretty jacked up guys. All the guys in great shape. It was really nice. Unfortunately, Trump couldn't make it. The first ball he was supposed to go to, which was the Liberty Ball, he was about 5 hours late, so he must have been exhausted going from the morning. So he couldn't make it to the American Legion Ball, which he usually goes to. But that's okay. Listen, it was an amazing time. A lot of chaos, but it was worth it. I don't know if I would go to the next one, but it was definitely an experience. So I want to thank everybody. Thanks, Sal Greco. Did a great job yesterday. John, as always, keeping the show going. So thank you, friends and listeners. You really help. You find out any information with overtime or anything that you want exposed, let us know. Please send it to John and myself, and we'll try to discuss it here. Stephen S., I didn't get a chance to cross paths with you. It was quick getting it in D.C., so I know you're out in L.A. Let's meet up together and, shout out to our friends and listeners. We appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow. Look forward to it. 8:05 live. And, of course, talk outside, Stephen, for me and you, 5:05 Pacific time.
Absolutely. All right, people, the Finance Unfiltered. We'll be back at you tomorrow, 8:05, 12:05. The Sal Greco show is coming on. That episode will be out 12:05. Check out the Sal Greco show. I'm actually going to be on it as well. So 12:05, people. All right. See you guys later.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime, but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?
Law enforcement professionals dedicate their lives to serving and protecting our community. But who's protecting their financial futures? That's where Laidlaw Blue comes in. Our wealth management platform is specifically designed for the law enforcement community. Laidlaw Blue is a division within Laidlaw Wealth Management, run by retired New York City detective John McDermott. His status as a retired detective uniquely positions him to establish a deep connection between Laidlaw Blue and the law enforcement community. Our platform is easy to use and provides a range of financial services, including investment management, retirement planning, and insurance solutions. With Laidlaw Blue, you can secure your financial future and provide for your loved ones. Our team of experienced financial advisors understands the unique challenges and opportunities that law enforcement professionals face. We're here to help you navigate the complexities of financial planning and achieve your goals. Laidlaw Blue. Secure your financial future today. Book a meeting using the QR code displayed or call us directly on 888 901 Blue. That's 888 901 Blue.